was awakened by the spirit that zoomed right over from my feet, right over the top of me, and hovered on the left side of my bed at my shoulders. It was sort of a glowing, misty cloud is the best way to describe it.
And out of the light a voice said to me, "Fear not. Sometimes God has to take the best flower in the garden."
32 degrees below zero, the middle of the night, and they just sat on the side of the road with no place to run, no lights in the distance, and realized they were probably going to freeze to death.
One of the fears I've had is drowning all my life. I was thinking about my family, my wife, my children, how they were going to take this news that I was lost at sea.
I was crying and she was crying. We were both really scared. And to try to keep ourselves from going too crazy or from freaking out, we started praying. And we started singing praise songs.
My angel. That's why I haven't been afraid the last few minutes.
My guardian angel came to help me.
They are endless. These stories of unexplained rescues, of spiritual beings that appear in times of need, of heroes that offer their aid then mysteriously disappear. These miracle happenings are part of every culture on the earth, in every recorded span of history. In fact, it's likely that you have such a story hanging out there somewhere in your memory. Something strange and unexplainable happened, from an intuition that came at just the right moment, to a strange coincidence that changed the path of your life, to a stunning miracle. Something happened. You know it happened. But how? Why? My name is Pam Kidd. A regular name, a regular person. A wife, a mom, someone's daughter, someone's neighbor, someone's friend. I write magazine articles for a living. One day I told my editor about an unusual thing that had happened to me, which I believed to be an angelic encounter. It led to a research assignment in which I spoke to many people who claimed to have had an experience with an angel. My story begins as a mystery of sorts, an event that took place the night my father died. 3 years passed before this mystery, this unexplained happening, was finally solved. When the solution came, it completely changed my understanding of things seen, as well as things that we cannot see in this strange and wonderful world. This is my story. In it, you'll probably discover a story of your own. My husband David first heard the news over the telephone from a coroner in the town where my father died. Within hours, we were at my parents' home in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We were literally numb with grief. After hours of sitting with my mother, there was nothing else left to do but go to bed. Exhausted, both David and I fell into a deep sleep. During the night, I awoke with a start. Someone was in the room. I was sure of it. I was frightened, but as quietly as I could, I turned my head toward the place where I knew the intruder was standing. I could see nothing but darkness. Yet I noticed something. I smelled flowers. Wonderful flowers, heavy with the sweetness of roses. And then the presence was gone. I slipped out of bed, went to my mother's room, and told her what had happened. She wanted to discover the source of the visitor with the flowers just as much as I did. We searched every room in the house. Nowhere could we find even a hint of the smell of flowers. For some unexplainable reason, through the next difficult days, I was surrounded with a strange sense of peace. Somehow the visitor with the flowers had brought me a very clear message. I was not alone. I thought of the incident often over the next years, wondering, but still no explanation came. Then out of the blue, an old Mexican man who served as our guide as we visited Mexico City was sharing the history of an ornate angel figure we had just admired inside a church. And of course you know, I remember hearing him say, when angels visit the earth, they sometimes announce their presence with the smell of flowers. When angels visit, I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Back home, I read everything about angels that I could get my hands on. Joan Wester Anderson, author of Where Angels Walk, began her own research after personally experiencing a supernatural rescue.
Being a person who was strongly spiritual, I had no bias against angels. It was just that I never really thought of them as getting involved in earth to the extent that I later learned they do. It was kind of a nice thought, but not anything specific to me. I felt if you're going to pray, you just go right to God. You don't need all the rest of this stuff kind of hanging around. And then my son Tim, who at the time was 21 years old, had an experience that kind of changed all that for me. He was coming from Connecticut to Chicago to be with us at Christmas. And of course my husband had called the boys a few days before the journey began to say, don't come because the Midwest is going through this terrible temperature drop. The interstates were being closed because this high wind was blowing the snow and it was very dangerous. And of course the kids kind of laughed. Well, weather warnings are for old people. You know, we're 21 years old, we're invincible, we can get through the mountains with no problem at all. And that's what they proceeded to do, except they broke down outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, on one of these deserted access roads, 32 degrees below zero, the middle of the night, and they just sat on the side of the road with no place to run, no lights in the distance, and realized they were probably going to freeze to death. And then all of a sudden, as Tim described it to me, there was a tow truck there. They saw this flare of light behind them. They hadn't seen this approach. It was just there. The guy got out. He didn't seem real surprised to see them. He hitched them up kind of without talking much, took them to a place of safety in Fort Wayne, and when they got out of the car and turned around to ask him how much the bill would be, there was no truck there, and there were no tracks in the snow leading away from where the boys stood. Now, when Tim told me that, I got goosebumps, and I said, Tim, I need to know what time that man came. And Tim said, well, that I know for sure. He came at 1:45 a.m. because I had just looked at my watch. Well, at 1:45, I had been standing by the front window saying, God, you've got to send someone. You have to send someone to help the kids. It's Christmas. God, you've got to send someone. I don't normally give God orders, but I was just doing it then with such intensity. That was 1:45. And of course, Tim was still on Eastern Standard Time. So I was left with the realization that at the very moment I had said, God, you have to send someone, God did. But who had God sent? And as a journalist, I knew the ways to research. And of course, I went back over the trail. I called the Highway Patrol. No, they had had no rescue vehicles out. That was before the days of cellular phones, and so they would not have allowed any of their people to cruise the roads because they could have gotten in trouble. I called several tow truck services. They laughed at me. Why would a driver be leaving the safety of town on a bitterly cold and dangerous night? No, they had had no calls. So the trail dried up, as I should have known that it would, because angels don't leave very many calling cards. The more I read and the more I researched, the more I discovered similar accounts of people who were convinced that angels had come to them in their time of need. Proof that angels exist? Hardly.
comforting? Yes. All I know is that in my own case, someone came into my room the night my father died and brought flowers not only to soothe my soul, but to convince me that I was not alone in my grief. And over, I heard stories of people whose angelic encounters were accompanied by the fragrance of flowers.
Well, this reminds me of a story of a Mississippi woman who was befriended as a sickly child by a loving uncle who later made himself known years after his death to her by overpowering her house with the fragrance of magnolia blossoms which he had brought to her as a child. We are back. You're listening to a special Beyond Reason program today. We're going to be talking about the subject that people are fascinated with all over the world. The subject today is angels. Our guest, John Ronner, the author of Do You Have a Guardian Angel? It's nice to see you again.
Oh, it's nice to be back, Teddy. Real pleasure.
Have you investigated? I mean, if somebody calls you and says,
my car was stranded, there was nobody around to help me, all of a sudden somebody showed up driving a tow truck. I mean, do you investigate to find out if this wasn't the AAA or if this was the...
I do follow up on stories, right. In many cases, it is difficult to nail the story down because in some cases you have a subjective experience on the part of one person, but sometimes there is circumstantial evidence. Sometimes there's multiple witnesses to an event. This could give rise to some suspicion that this was more than just subjectivity.
Let's go to the phone. Mary Ellen, hi, you're on Beyond Reason.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Tell us about your angel encounter.
Well, this happened when my son was an infant, and I was walking him in his baby carriage, and I came to a corner on a busy street, and I was letting the carriage down onto the road because there was a curve there, and I heard a voice, a very commanding voice said to me, "Put the carriage back on the sidewalk," which I did. I didn't hesitate. It startled me so. And when I got him back up on the sidewalk, I stepped back a little bit, and immediately a trailer truck turned down the street that I was crossing. And I hadn't seen the truck. He was going too fast, and he cut the corner so sharp that his wheels came up right over the curb and just missed me and the baby carriage. And I was so startled that I watched this thing happening. It was sort of surreal. And I looked around to see who had said to me, to put the carriage back, and there was nobody there. So, needless to say, I was a bit shook up. I didn't think at the moment that it was an angel, but I felt it was something certainly unusual.
it's a lovely story.
That's a remarkable story. I'm just curious, Marilyn, has your life changed from that? Have you gone back to your normal life? Did it affect you in any way from that point on?
I felt, for an instant, I saw how mortal we are, how quickly something can happen to just, end your life. The other thing that it did for me is, as I went through other crises later in my life, I really believe it gave me a little more strength to believe that a miracle can happen or things can work out.
Thank you for telling your story.
You're welcome.
It's beautiful. Bye-bye.
As I read more and more of these angel stories, something else happened. All those loose ends from my past, and you probably know what I'm talking about. Those events that neither you nor I can find an explanation for. So we file them under unbelievable luck, or strange coincidences, or it was a miracle. All those loose ends that have lingered over the years to become misfits in our memories. These same kinds of experiences kept cropping up in my research as universal angel stories.
It was the spring of 1961. I was 8 or 9 years old, and I had gone outside to play on the carport. And through the winter, my parents had cut down a number of trees on our property and had stacked the wood on our carport, creating a large wood pile. And it stood probably 7 or 8 feet from the ground. So I climbed up on the wood pile to play. And as I climbed up on the wood pile, I lost my balance and began to fall over backwards, head first, off of the back of this wood pile. and strong hands came up and literally pushed me back up on top of that wood pile and kept me from falling. And when I turned around, I expected to see my mother and my dad, that they had been behind me and had seen me begin to fall and had run to my rescue to keep me from hurting myself. But when I turned around, there was no one there.
A helping hand out of nowhere. Joan Wester Anderson interviewed a prominent businessman who also received a helping hand in his time of desperate need.
Donald Spann was one of the people that wrote to me after the publication of Where Angels Walk. I loved it because it had all the elements of a good angel story in it. It showed people, I thought, that no, angel experiences don't just happen to saints or people who are on their knees all the time. They happen to ordinary people, people whom God is calling. And that was a call for Don. So he fell off a boat. He was not wearing a life preserver. He who preached safety to all of his employees with a vengeance was out on a craft without wearing a life preserver of his own. He was the only passenger in the boat. It was his boat, and his driver continued on, not realizing that Don had fallen out of the back of the boat.
If any of you listening to me have been around the ocean, you know that's serious business. And to be 20 miles offshore in what the depth finder that just a few minutes before told me it was about 80 feet of water, you're in with fish that are big enough to consider you part of the food chain, and I know to be nervous about that. I didn't have a knife, I didn't have a weapon, I didn't have anything to help me out. I didn't have on a pair of long pants to tie the legs and use for flotation. I've been out there, I don't know, I'm going to say 45 minutes. I was thinking about my family, my wife, my children, how they were going to take this news that I was lost at sea.
And when Don realized that he was probably going to drown, one of the first things he did was pray.
It's such a temptation to say, God, if you'll just get me out of this jam I'm in right now, I'll be a good boy the rest of my life. I realized that's bargaining with God, and I couldn't do it. No matter if I died and I was totally desperate, I still could not bargain. And so I prayed to God, if as thy will, if I'm allowed, may I have your permission, God, that I get just 1 foot on the sandy beach. And then if I fall over dead, that's fine. But please don't take me this way, if I may ask.
And then there was an element that I don't find in too many of the stories, but I think it occurs more than we know. And that was Don ran into the darkness. He had a temptation in the water. He had a voice come that was not a heavenly voice, and he knew it.
And then suddenly this same voice came back the third time, and it was angry. It was a higher pitch, and it was right in my right ear and echoing. And this voice said, call my name again, and it called John T.'s name for the first time. It said, Don, John T. is not going to come back. That he's not going to turn around. And I knew that was wrong. I knew he would at least turn around when he missed me. He would not go on to Fort Lauderdale and report me lost at sea. He would turn around, and I knew that was not the truth. So it made me very angry. And then when he told me to give up, this was the third time, to give up and slide on down, it wouldn't hurt. I kind of looked up over here, and I said, look here, I've told you that I'm going to swim all day and all night. I said, if I'm 10 feet under the water, I'm still going to be moving my arms and legs. I said, you got that, fella? And at that point, I was embarrassed because I realized I was talking to a voice. I'm by myself out there.
Miraculously, after remaining adrift for what felt like an eternity, Don Spann had managed to stay afloat, while his companion John T. searched the open seas.
And all of a sudden I heard this deep rumble, blum, 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 and it was the exhaust sound of a boat. And that was old Perseverance. That was my boat. I knew her sound. And so I got thrilled, but I was on my back to save energy. And I said, don't turn over yet, don't turn over yet, not yet. And finally I said, roll over now. And I rolled over, and there she was. I had to figure out a way to get out of the way and still be seen, because it's so hard to find anybody or anything in the ocean specifically. If you stop and think about my little old coconut head, was the only thing sticking up for 8 mile radius. How you going to find something this small? And he looked my way 3 times and didn't see me. And I was getting discouraged, and he was coming at 11, 10:30, 10 o'clock, and it's getting quicker. And then all of a sudden I saw John T. lower the glasses and put them back up, lower them, and then he hollered, John! And I said, oh, thank God he sees me. And I kind of rolled over, and I went partially blacked out.
Then, in a nearly tragic twist of fate, the hull of the boat that was about to rescue Don pushed him under the water, and he began to sink.
And I started sliding down towards the center of the boat and back away, because I drifted at a different rate than the boat was drifting on the surface. And there was a light over here to the left, and I knew there was no sunshine a moment before. And it was like a filtered yellow light, looking like I was looking through a pitcher of tea. And I was trying to pull on the rope to get myself to the boat with my left hand. I just didn't have the strength to move anything else. And all of a sudden, kaploosh, and it looked just the same as when you're in a swimming pool and you see a million bubbles up there when somebody jumps in on top of you. And I witnessed that, and then I thought, don't fight John T. Let him help you. And I felt a hand on my bicep and a separate hand on my forearm. And I didn't figure out, I said, how's he going to help me get to the boat like that? All of a sudden, I felt hands on my shoulder blades, and I went straight to the ladder just like I belonged there, like a magnet. But I couldn't get my leg up on that bottom rung, which was right about my waist, and I just didn't have the strength. And that takes strength on a good day. If you're having a good time, it's still a tough job to get up. And I was trying to get my foot up there, and all of a sudden I felt a hand on my calf and one on my ankle. And it placed my foot up there for me, and then I felt hands under my hiney. And up I went just like I was on a hydraulic lift of some kind or another. I just stood up.
Don was whisked to the nearest hospital and treated for exposure and exhaustion. It was only then that he began to fully understand the implications of his miraculous rescue.
John T. comes in. I give John T. the biggest hug going. You can't pay somebody for saving your life. You just, what do you say to somebody? There's no words. They're not, just thank you is not good enough. And then after we greeted each other, and he told me this went from the worst day of his life to the best day of his life, all in the same day. I said, John T., you scared me half to death. Why did you jump in the water? He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I saw you jump in and you grabbed a hold of me. He said, Don, what are you talking about? I never left the boat. Well, it hit me like a ton of bricks. All the pieces of the puzzle suddenly came together. This voice that I heard 3 times in the ocean, I actually heard 4 times. That first time was, you're going out of the boat this morning, fella. And if I heard that voice this second, I would recognize it. It was, as far as I'm concerned, it was the devil himself. The helping me to the boat was the opposite end of the spectrum. Jesus' will was for his guardian angels to help me some way, somehow. I don't know why, but they did. And I got help to that boat. I call it a blessing. I've experienced the hands-on of a guardian angel, more than one.
John, I'm curious, are there patterns, are there consistencies as to whom these angels help?
And that brings up a really touchy point there, because a lot of people feel bad if they've had a tragedy and there was no spiritual intervention to help them, and they might say to themselves, well, why me? Is God mad at me or something? And I've never seen any indication that that could possibly be true. But answering the question of why do angels go on vacation, as I call it, why was Stephen stoned in the book of Acts, but just a couple of chapters down, Peter was freed by an angel, you know. The philosophers have not been able to settle that one in thousands of years of wrestling with the question. They have come up with a few theories. Some people feel that the theory of karma might be an explanation, the idea that what we put out into the world comes back to us, reverberates back to us in some fashion or form. Some people have pointed out that, well, our natural abilities vary from person to person. Some people take to a foreign language like a duck to water. Other people stumble tongue-tied trying to learn it for years. Some people, by this token, some people may be more psychically gifted and may be able to communicate. It may be that the angels are trying to get through in all instances, but in some cases they get through, in other cases they just can't be picked up.
People say, well, what makes the difference? Why do angels come sometimes and not others? Well, I don't know. But I do know that a lot of times we don't ask. The Bible says you have not because you ask not. It's so typical. I mean, we don't think that we can bring about a change from a spiritual point of view. And so we don't even try.
Jocelyn Vale and a friend found themselves stranded on a mountaintop in Uruguay, and they did ask for help.
We had been up there for, I guess, a couple of hours, and we looked down and saw that the bus that had brought us there, along with the rest of our group, was pulling off. And it was leaving. We didn't know if they had left anybody there to find us. We didn't know if they even knew that we were there. And it was at this point that we both really panicked. I was crying and she was crying. We were both really scared. And to try to keep ourselves from going too crazy or from freaking out, we started praying. And we started singing praise songs. So we tried just climbing down for a while, and that got to be too hard. And so what we would finally do is just place ourselves between two boulders, kind of on the ground, and kind of scoot forward a little bit, like a kid on a slide, and push ourselves forward some. And that worked. It was getting us towards the bottom. And, so we were relieved. We finally had something, some way that we were going to get to the bottom. After we had been doing that for about half an hour, just sliding down, this man walks up to us. He was a young man. And my friend and I, thought, oh, good, finally, somebody can show us the way down. And so we're yelling, ayuda, ayuda, and pointing down. That was the one word we could think of in Spanish. It means help. And so we're yelling, ayuda, ayuda, and pointing down and crying and screaming and everything. And the man took my hand and he took her hand and started leading us to the left. And we just stopped. And we said, no, that way. And again started saying, ayuda, ayuda, and pointing down. And he just kind of nodded and took our hands and kept leading us to the left. And he led us to the left for quite some way. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, because it wasn't very far after that he started finally leading us down. And we're thinking, well, finally he's figured out what we want here, and he's showing us the way to the bottom. And when we got to the bottom, they hadn't forgotten us. They had left a translator and my mother there. And he pointed up and showed her where we had been. And the place where we had been trying to slide down, we were less than 10 feet away from going over a cliff. And when I saw that, we both just kind of lost it at that point. We knew that we would not have been able to get down. And the four of us are walking together, and the man just stopped walking. And we took a few more steps and turned around, and the man was gone. There were no footprints. We could see our footprints in the sand, and couldn't see his, from the point where he had disappeared. There was nowhere for him to have gone. There were no trees around. There were no cars, no buildings. Nothing, nowhere where he could have gone.
Do angels, do they appear in human form? Some people say that yes, they saw an angel that appeared to them as a human being, and they've determined that it was an angel because of the many uncanny circumstances that surrounded the incident of intervention. The term angel is so loosely used that for all practical purposes you really have to investigate to find out what a person has in mind when they say they have an angel.
We hear countless stories of angels who warn or rescue people in their time of need. But I also found stories of angels tending to another kind of need. The deep need for comfort, which people face when grieving the loss of someone dear to them.
Spent the last 3 months of my father's life with him, and we became very, very close. There were many nights nights when he would ask me to come over and be with him that night, and he was in extreme pain because the cancer had just run through his entire body. The night that he died, I was in bed mulling over the day's activities and the feelings and trying to process how I was going to react when the word finally came that my father had died. It certainly couldn't be a surprise because we knew it was just a matter of any minute now. And sort of went through those feelings and emotions right before I drifted off to sleep. I was awakened by the spirit that zoomed right over from my feet, right over the top of me, and hovered on the left side of my bed at my shoulders. It was sort of a glowing, misty cloud is the best way to describe it, but I immediately recognized it as my father. He was emanating these absolute feelings of well-being and joy and freedom while my father was hovering beside my bed, and we were just sort of basking in each other's presence, feeling each other's feelings. The best way to describe it, a connection opened up off to the distance. I could feel an awareness off into a further off place. I could hear other beings talking amongst themselves, and they were what I would describe as angels. But my father turned and looked in that direction. And then he looked back at me and acknowledged and immediately said that they're calling me now and I have to go. And when he said that, there was more than just that. There was this complete sense of mission and understanding that he had of where it was he had to go next, and that he had to go with these beings, and it was time for him to proceed to this next realm.
It was back in 1984 when I received word that my sister had expired. I immediately got in my car and started to drive to Chicago, and I was upset with God. I was asking him, why, Lord, why my sister? She had everything to live for, 20 years old, and I was so mad, I was just bitter underneath the skin. And when I got to the funeral, I was still asking the same question, Lord, why? Why did you take my sister? Then a few weeks went past. It was March the 25th. I was in my room, and all of a sudden this light appeared, big bright light, something I've never seen before, and I've never been able to see again. And out of the light, a boy said to me, fear not, your sister is in a better place. And the boy said that sometimes God has to take the best flower in the garden. And at that moment, I could feel all of the tension, all of the anger just leave my body. It seemed to be real clear. Just a clear, bright light, something like a new day. And it really was a new day for me because it was really my resurrection.
Whether the angel appears through a touch, a smell, a mysterious nudge, a sudden insight, through an average-looking human being, or in a blinding flash of light, all these stories have one thing in common. The players come away believing something happened. Someone was there. I am not alone. According to all the great and lasting religions of the world, angels have been with us from the beginning of time. Angels, unseen for the most part, have always been heavily involved in the world's unfolding.
In the New Testament, we see the appearance of angels at almost every significant moment of the story. Angels are involved in announcing Jesus' birth. They attend to him at his temptation. They appear in a variety of his encounters in the world. They are the voice which first proclaims his resurrection, which is the touchstone of the Christian faith.
Judaism, being the oldest of the Western religions, has gone through a whole series of changes from the biblical time to modern religious belief. as far as philosophy and theology are concerned, but the concept of angels has always been a presence no matter what period of time you study or what period of liturgy you appreciate within Jewish life. In the Bible, in the Tanakh as we call it, the concept of angels were to be servants or assistants to God. The Hebrew word angel is malach, and malach also carries with it the meaning of messenger. They were the go-betweens between God and the people of the earth. There were two angels in the earliest biblical tradition whose power and authority have never been questioned up until modern times. And these were the archangels, as they're referred to, Gabriel and Michael. Even their names are Hebrew words. Michael meaning, in Hebrew, Mikael, who is like God. And Gabriel, the strength of God, or God is my strength. These two figures had amongst their other responsibilities the privilege of praising God.
In Islam, we have what we call the articles of faith. We believe in the oneness of God, believe in the prophets, the books, the messengers, and the angels. Angels play a very significant role in the Islamic faith. We learn in the Holy Quran, Jibreel, which means Gabriel in Arabic, he brought the Quran to the Prophet. He recite a part, the Prophet would remember that part, and he would teach it to his followers, and then Gabriel would come and recite more, and he would teach it to his followers. And this went on for 23 years. And in the Quran, it tells us that every person has angels as guardians over them. And they write down every deed that they do. Make sure you do the right thing and say the right thing, because you will receive a book on the day of judgment, and that book will have every deed that you have ever done in it. So do be careful.
Well, first of all, we believe angels are personal spiritual beings who are non-corporeal. So they're like human beings in the sense that they have intelligence and free will. They can know and love, but they're unlike humans in the sense that they don't have physical bodies. So they share with us a common bond. We're all creatures of God, and yet they are distinct from human beings. I guess that there are two kind of uniquely Catholic beliefs, if I can put it that way. One, we do emphasize in our feast days a focus on guardian angels. And it's the Catholic belief that the angels guard each one of us. They protect us. The other major feast day that we celebrate in the Catholic tradition would be the Feast of the Archangels, of Michael, of Gabriel, and Raphael. They're called archangels because they have special, important roles to play in God's plan of salvation.
So it seems that if we believe in anything spiritual, then it only makes good common sense to believe in angels. But are these heavenly beings only for the Earth's so-called believing population? Dr. Raymond Moody is renowned for his research into near-death experiences reported by people who were declared clinically dead and then were medically resuscitated. Angel sightings are commonly reported in these near-death experiences.
When I was a medical student in the pediatrics rotation, I was in the pediatrics endocrinology clinic. And this was long before there was any publicity about near-death experiences, and nobody knew that I was studying them. And I was talking with a little boy who was 11 years old who said, "Doctor, a year ago, I had a crisis, and I almost died." I think he said that he died. And he said, "And when I died, I went up." And he described this ascension and into a place of beautiful light. And he said that he was surrounded by flocks of angels, and that he was seeing all these angels all around him as he went up. And I talked with him about that, and I asked him for more detail. And it was clear that he was not talking about winged beings like he might have seen in a child's book, but more in terms of beings of light, beautiful people who were full of love and who were there to help him. Another case that really I remember quite vividly is a woman who wrote to me, actually, after she had seen an article on my research, and then I later talked to her at length. And she described how when she was dying in the hospital and she got out of her body and she looked down and saw the doctors trying to resuscitate her and so on, and she said immediately she was in the presence of two beings who she later identified as her guiding angels. And I thought this was particularly interesting because this woman came from a Protestant background, and the notion of a guardian angel was not something that was in her religious tradition. But she said that even though she had never seen these people, that she had a sense of great familiarity and warmth and love from them.
And there was this slight buzzing at the ear, and
after that, when things didn't go quite right, that she would always go back in her mind and heart to that point and to think about those people that she had been there with.
People sometimes say, why do you think there's so much going on now? Well, I don't know. Maybe there is an end of an era coming. But I have kind of come to the conclusion that there's a lot of spiritual activity going on now, both the negative and the positive, because we see every kind of depravity that there is right now, and many accept it as just routine. But yet at the same time, we're hearing all these magnificent encounters and people's moments of grace. I think I've been touched by a heavenly presence. I'm beginning to understand that God loves me. My child seems to be so aware of spiritual things.
There is an angel that you can connect with, that will talk to you, that will allow you to be positive. And you don't have to give up on life just because you had a bad experience.
It's been very comforting to think that there is a presence that is with me and can be there and help me even when I don't know to ask for help myself.
And to realize that there are angelic beings as well as other previously deceased relatives or friends that in some way can help us through this thing called life. It's exciting. It's what's next.
That was an angel. That was an angel, and I really believe that it was. Even if it's not what people, even if somebody doesn't believe that it was actually an angel from heaven, I believe that it was definitely someone that God sent.
If nothing else, it's as close to scientific proof I'll ever have. Is there something between worldly as we know it and heaven as we envision it? I say there's something in the middle called guardian angels.
And now that I have 3 children and a husband that I love very much, it's also very comforting to know that if that presence is here for me, then it's also available for them.
And so the angels seem to tell us we are not alone. Are they not messengers sent by a supreme being, offered as protectors, as guides, as benefactors, whose only earthly purpose is to care for us? Here unseen, are they hovering near, waiting to be listened to, waiting to be called on, hoping to guide us over the rough spots of living, ready to lead us into new and wonderfully evolved levels of life on earth? And yet, we've barely scratched the surface. There's so much left to know, and so very many angel stories yet to be told.